Welcome back, dear listener. When last we left our dreamer, he had found a fragile peace in the house of Potiphar, a place of beauty and of hidden danger. The air was heavy with incense, and the eyes of the powerful watched him with envy, desire, and fear. Tonight, the dream will be tested, not by hunger or chains, but by the quiet fire of the human heart. Close your eyes once more and follow the path of fate as it winds deeper through Egypt's golden halls. This is part 2 of Prophet Joseph. The dreamer among the stars, told in the voice of calm and eternity. Here, on Sleepy Legentale. The prison lay under the city like a forgotten cellar under a palace, a place where daylight did not rule, and time slipped its bracelets to move as it pleased. Above, Egypt glittered, its courtyards bright with blue lotus, its barges gliding along the Nile. Below, the world narrowed to stone, iron, and the voices of men finding out what silence really meant. Joseph descended into it, with his wrists bound and his head unbowed. The guard's torch flared, threw gold onto wet walls, then guttered. A door grated, a key rang, and darkness settled with the intimate weight of an old cloak. The air smelled of rust and old straw. Water dripped somewhere with patient insistence, like a prayer too humble to be denied. He sat on the floor and let the cold teach him its grammar. Suffering spoke in small words down here: hunger, ache, wait, breathe. He had known pits and chains before. This one had a deeper echo, as if the city's heartbeat reached him through the stone. When the first rat skittered past his sandal, he merely lifted his feet and kept still. When the shouts of drunk guards thickened into snores, he slept in pieces, stitching those scraps of sleep together with a thread of trust. Days blurred and then began to separate. He learned when the head jailer walked the corridor by the scrape of his sandals. He learned which guard hummed to himself when bored, and which one spat curses at the door for sport. The cell across from him held a man who recited numbers all day in a monotone. Another sang lullabies in a dialect no one else knew, as if singing back to a child he had left outside the world's walls. Joseph did not let the dark make him smaller. Each morning he rose before the guards rattled their keys, washed his face with a fold of damp cloth, and whispered the blessing his father had taught him. He tidied his straw, folded the worn blanket that had been thrown to him the second day, cleared the floor of old crumbs with the edge of a broken shard. A man can be poor and still choose order. The soul drinks from such small cups and grows. It was not long before the head jailer noticed. At first it was curiosity. Why did the Hebrew keep his corner like a shrine? Then it was convenience. If a lamp needed trimming, Joseph did it. If a ledger needed marks, Joseph's hand was steady. The man began to linger, leaning against the doorframe while Joseph worked, asking in a gruff voice where Canaan lay on the map of memory. North and east, Joseph would say gently. Past the ridge that looks like a sleeping lion, past the hills that shine like copper in late sun. Not on any tablet I've read, the jailer muttered. But his mouth softened. Soon Joseph had charge of small tasks: the sweep of a corridor, the distribution of bread, the counting of water skins. The other prisoners learned to wait for his footfall, because the bread was a little more even when he held the basket, and the water a breath more generous when he tipped the skin. It was not much, and it was exactly enough to keep despair from crusting over the day. Nights made a different music. The prison breathed. Metal ticked as it cooled. Men turned and sighed. A chain shivered on its hook like a startled serpent. Sometimes, lying awake, Joseph would name the constellations he could not see, mapping the invisible sky across the low vault of stone. Orion, Pleiades, the bow. He traced them with his tongue and felt their cold, clean shapes steady his blood. The stars did not bow for him here. They endured for him, and endurance, he had learned, is a more faithful gift than glory. One morning, the corridor filled with the sound of authority. Hard sandals, the slap of leather, voices that assumed obedience. The head jailer stepped aside to let them pass. Two men were pushed forward, hands bound with plaited thong, collars gleaming even in the half-dark. Their faces carried the afterglow of palace life, now smudged with fear. One was the royal cupbearer, who had once poured wine into the Pharaoh's gold. The other, the chief baker, whose hands had known the temperature of royal ovens better than most men know their wives' moods. They did not look built for darkness. The cupbearer's fingers twitched toward a goblet that wasn't there. The baker sniffed the air, as if trying to locate yeast in a place where nothing rose. The jailer barked orders. The men were given mats near Joseph's corridor, close enough for conversation to find them at night and prayer to find them at dawn. Joseph watched them with the historical tenderness of a man who recognizes another animal in the same trap. He served them their ration with the same fairness he offered his neighbors. He showed them where the wall's seam held a thin trickle of clean water if you cupped your hand just so. He told them, because they needed to know, that the first 3 days are worst, and then the body learns the shape of the cage. On the 4th morning, he found them altered, their faces pulled tight, their eyes fixed on nothing. "Why do your faces look so downcast today?" he asked. And the question was not polite. It was a hand on the shoulder in a world where most hands preferred to push. "We have dreamed a dream," the cupbearer said, voice thin. "And there is no interpreter of it." The baker glanced at Joseph, and then looked away as if ashamed of needing anyone. Joseph's answer came without performance. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me, I pray you." The cupbearer spoke first, hunger and hope arguing in his throat. "In my dream, a vine was before me, and on the vine were 3 branches, and as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand." Joseph listened the way one listens for rain. He closed his eyes briefly, as if scanning a horizon. "This is the interpretation," he said softly. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand as you formerly did when you were his cupbearer." Then his voice grew more intimate, a plea dressed in courtesy. "But remember me when it is well with you. Show kindness, I pray you, and mention me to Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon." The cupbearer stared as if sunlight had appeared where none could logically be. He touched Joseph's arm, then drew his hand back. A man unused to gratitude directed toward the lowly. The baker, heart rallied by good news, stepped forward with the hopeful bravado of a gambler placing his last coin. I also was in my dream. He began quickly, fearing the light might move on without him. And behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there were all manner of baked food for Pharaoh. And the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. The silence that followed was different, pitched lower, tender, and grave. Joseph's face did not harden. It gentled. He breathed once, as if steadying a scale. "This is the interpretation," he said, each word chosen like a brick in a necessary wall. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from off you, and will hang you upon a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from off you." The baker's eyes filled and emptied in the same motion. He nodded like a man accepting the weather. "Thank you," he said, and meant it, because even a hard truth spoken cleanly is kinder than a lie, whose sweetness rots. After that, the days bent toward their appointed shape. In a place where time often felt like chewed leather, the horizon sharpened. Day 1, men whispered. Day 2, guards prepared. Day 3, the corridor brightened with torches. Names were called. The cupbearer went up trembling and returned to the sky. The baker went up with a kind of weary dignity and returned to the earth. The prison absorbed both outcomes with the same stone patience. Fate has no taste for spectacle. It eats what is placed before it. The cell beside Joseph's was empty again. He swept it himself, not because anyone asked, but because he understood the ritual value of order in a world governed by disorder. That night, he lay awake longer than usual, not to question the God he served. He had little practice at accusation, but to keep company with the ache that remained after obedience. "Remember me," he had said, and the words glowed faintly in the dark like a coal kept under ash. Weeks turned to months, the way water turns to river without advertising the transformation. The cupbearer's gratitude evaporated in palace heat. Joseph's name fell out of his mouth and into the cracks between courtly concerns, banquets, petitions, the choreography of royal mornings. He did not mean to forget. Forgetting is a muscle that grows without intention when a man moves from famine to feast. Joseph's life steadied into its precise poverty. He kept the ledgers for the jailer in neat lines that comforted a man who preferred numbers to men. He learned the weather by how the damp congealed on the walls, and the season by how the smell of the Nile rose through the city's floors. Sometimes he asked for wax and a stylus, and wrote names he did not want to vanish: Jacob, Benjamin, Rachel. Then smoothed the wax and wrote them again the next week, as if permanence could be practiced. He tended 2 infirm men through fevers, coaxing water between cracked lips, cooling foreheads with the hem of his tunic. He stood apart when tempers flared, and stood between when blows would otherwise have landed. The jailer trusted him with keys for an hour at a time. Joseph never used them to do anything except what he had promised. When despair skulked at the door, he fed it discipline. When anger rattled its chains, he lulled it with work. When loneliness spoke in his mother's voice, he answered with psalms learned long ago in a valley where sheep grazed and a boy's heart rehearsed courage on the small stage of ordinary days. He dreamed sometimes, but the dreams were domestic. A tree that would not die, a cistern that could never be emptied, a sheaf that bent but would not break at the waist. He woke grateful for their modesty. Grandeur had cost him enough. On certain nights, rare but always precise, he felt a nearness that made the cell large and the air easy to breathe. He did not name it, for fear of making it smaller. He only inclined his heart toward it, the way a plant, imprisoned in a courtyard pot, finds the single angle where the sun can touch it. 2 full years stack themselves like jars in a storeroom. Even patience learns the weight of itself. But patience, when braided with faith, does not rot. It becomes rope. Then Egypt woke to a shiver. It did not begin in the prison. It began in the palace, where Pharaoh, whose word was weather and whose glance ripened fruit, had dreamed and found his own interpreters to be empty of meaning. 7 sleek cows had risen from the Nile and grazed among papyrus, beautiful as river-born gods. After them, 7 gaunt cows, rib-fretted and moon-eyed, climbed from the same holy water and devoured the fat ones, yet remained as thin as famine. The king woke sweating, slept, and dreamed again. 7 ears of grain, full and good, grew on one stalk. 7 withered ears, scorched by the east wind, swallowed them whole. Morning found him restless. He summoned magicians, sages, men who could read the sky and the dark underside of a bird's wing. They circled his dream like dogs around a stone. Their mouths made symbols, their hands drew diagrams. Meaning did not come. In the bustle of that failure, the cupbearer's memory pricked him like a thorn through silk. Shame swept him, hot, clean, exact. He bowed low. "I remember my faults this day," he said, and told the story of a Hebrew in the dungeon who had listened without mockery and spoken without error. 3 days to wine, 3 days to dust, both fulfilled as if time itself had been given a script. Pharaoh's gaze sharpened like a blade being honed. "Bring him," he said. Iron woke, doors opened, commands accelerated along corridors like hawks along wind. The jailer came with a face that had trouble hiding its surprise. "Up," he said, and his voice was almost kind. "Wash. You are brought before Pharaoh." Water was fetched, cool, clean, prodigal. Joseph washed the prison from his skin. A razor kissed the wilderness from his cheeks. Fresh linen was placed on him, the fabric whispering in a new grammar along his shoulders. For a moment he touched the cloth, remembering another garment of many colors, and he smiled without bitterness. He had learned the difference between a robe that was given and a purpose that was woven. He walked through the familiar shadows as if through a dream he had already survived. The corridor climbed. Air thinned and sweetened. Light grew like a promise kept. The last door opened onto a courtyard washed with sun, and Joseph blinked, not at the brightness, but at the discipline of looking only at what the moment asked of him. He did not reach for the past. He did not try to seize the future. He stepped into the present the way a man steps onto a boat that must cross. The guards conducted him across polished stone. Columns rose, painted with blues that had swallowed sky and reds that remembered deserts. At the far end, beneath a canopy carved with winged suns, Pharaoh sat. A man encircled by power the way a mountain is encircled by air. "Are you the Hebrew who interprets dreams?" the king asked, and the court's attention tightened, eager as a bowstring. Joseph's answer was the oldest truth he owned. "It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace." A murmur, the kind a room makes when it recognizes something it did not know it was missing. A slave who does not flatter. A prisoner who does not beg. a man who makes himself small not to survive, but to make room for what is larger than kings. Pharaoh leaned forward and told his dreams. As he spoke, the river, the cattle, the ears of corn. The palace light shifted as if listening, a thin cloud drifting across the sun and then away again. When he finished, the silence did not feel empty. It felt like fertile ground, waiting. Joseph lifted his eyes, and for an instant the weight of the prison and the well and the caravan and the house and the cell all compressed into a single point. The bright, unbroken thread that had run through each place, binding lost to meaning. He did not tremble. "The dreams of Pharaoh are one," he began, voice level as water in a measuring cup. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. But that belongs to the next chapter. For now, in the long deep of his spirit, the boy who once dreamed beneath Canaan's stars stood where stone met sunlight. And the story, having traveled through pits and chambers and the narrow tunnels of patience, opened into a room large enough for famine and abundance to enter together. And somewhere far away, in a tent where grief had learned to live beside breath, an old man lifted his head in the dawn without knowing why, and found that the air tasted slightly of rain. Morning flooded the palace of Pharaoh with gold. Columns gleamed as if the sun itself had entered to pay homage. Slaves moved like shadows in the brilliance, pouring water over bronze basins, scattering petals across polished floors, filling the air with perfumes that blurred the edge between heaven and earth. But beneath the splendor, unease coiled. The king had dreamed, and Egypt held its breath. Pharaoh had seen the Nile rise before him, its waters shining like molten glass. From its depths came 7 cows, sleek, healthy, their hides glowing with the color of ripe grain. They grazed peacefully among reeds. Then, as the dream darkened, 7 other cows emerged, thin and hollow-eyed, their bones sharp against their skin. They devoured the first, but gained no flesh. He woke trembling, only to fall into another dream. A single stalk of wheat bore 7 ears, full and golden, swaying in a light that seemed divine. Then came 7 other ears, withered by the east wind, their husks twisted, and they consumed the good. When dawn came, he summoned his priests, magicians, and wise men, the interpreters of omens, the readers of entrails, the watchers of stars. They spoke in riddles, drew signs on the floor, murmured to gods of falcon and sun, but none could read the dream's heart. Pharaoh's patience was silk stretched too thin. It was then that the cupbearer, standing at the edge of the throne, his eyes full of guilt, fell to his knees. "I remember my faults this day," he cried. "There was a young man, a Hebrew, in the prison. The chief baker and I dreamed on the same night. He interpreted for us, and what he said came to pass. You restored me to my office. The baker you hanged. My lord, he is still there." Pharaoh's gaze, sharp as sunlight on metal, fixed on him. "Bring him." The command ran like lightning through corridors and down staircases into the bowels of the city. The guards hurried, keys clattered. The door that had known only gloom opened to the raw breath of daylight. "Up," the warden said, half in disbelief. "You are called by Pharaoh himself." Water was poured into a basin. Joseph washed away the dust of years. His chains were struck off. A razor passed over his cheeks. They dressed him in linen white as dove's wings, perfumed his hair, and placed sandals on his feet. He stood for a moment, silent. The light on his skin felt like forgiveness. Then they led him upward, through narrow corridors that widened into sunlit halls, through layers of sound and scent and color, until he emerged into the heart of the kingdom. The throne room blazed with gold and turquoise. Columns shaped like papyrus stems reached high to a painted ceiling where wings of falcons stretched toward eternity. Servants knelt. Musicians stilled their flutes. Pharaoh sat upon his throne, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the cobra at his brow poised in eternal readiness. Joseph knelt. The floor beneath him was cool, polished as still water. Pharaoh's voice cut through the hush like a chime. I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph lifted his head. His eyes were calm, their light deeper than fear. It is not in me, he said. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. A ripple went through the court. Priests shifting, scribes exchanging glances. But Pharaoh's expression did not change. He leaned forward, his fingers resting on the arms of his throne. Then hear my dream, he said. And he told it. As he spoke, the air seemed to change. The torches burned higher. The scent of incense deepened. When he finished, silence fell. A silence so wide, it seemed the whole kingdom waited in it. Joseph's gaze unfocused for a heartbeat, as if reading from a scroll, invisible to others. Then he spoke, his voice low and sure. The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows and the 7 good ears are 7 years of plenty. The 7 thin cows and the 7 withered ears are 7 years of famine. Behold, there will come 7 years of great abundance throughout all the land of Egypt. After them shall arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten. The famine shall consume the land. The dream was doubled because the thing is established by God, and he will shortly bring it to pass. The words hung like light caught in glass. The priests looked uneasy. The scribes bent their heads. Pharaoh's face was unreadable. Then Joseph continued, his tone turning from revelation to counsel. Now therefore, let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let him appoint overseers to gather 1/5 of the produce in the years of plenty. Store it in the cities under Pharaoh's authority. And that food shall be for reserve against the 7 years of famine, that the land perish not. He finished and bowed his head. A long stillness followed. Pharaoh's signet ring gleamed in the half-light. A pigeon cooed faintly somewhere high in the rafters. Then the king rose. Can we find such a man as this, in whom is the Spirit of God? He turned toward Joseph. Since God has shown you all this, there is none so wise and discreet as you. You shall be over my house, and according to your word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. The court gasped, a sound like wind through reeds. Pharaoh stepped down, removed the signet ring from his own hand, and placed it on Joseph's. He dressed him in garments of fine linen, hung a gold chain about his neck, and commanded that he be carried through the streets in the 2nd chariot. Servants cried before him, "Bow the knee." And so Joseph, once sold by his brothers, once forgotten in prison, became ruler over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh gave him a new name, Zaphanath-Paneah, the revealer of hidden things, and a wife from among the priestly line, Asenath, daughter of Potipharah of On. From the palace balcony, Joseph looked out over the Nile, wide and eternal. Barges drifted by like silent prayers. In the far fields, the first wheat of the season shimmered under a wind that smelled of wet clay and coming life. He remembered the pit, the caravan, the prison, and felt no bitterness. Each place had been a rung in the ladder, whose top touched heaven. Under Joseph's guidance, Egypt flourished. Granaries rose beside temples and canals. Scribes recorded every sheaf, every measure of grain. The Nile overflowed its banks in time with his calculations. Its gifts were gathered, not wasted. He rode through the provinces, his chariot wheels cutting through dust scented with harvest. The people loved him, for he ruled not like a master, but like a shepherd. Fields bent with abundance, barns swelled. Even the poorest hut had bread. Children called him the man of the Nile's mercy. Farmers said, "The Hebrews' God blesses our land." At night, when the city slept, Joseph would stand on the terrace and look at the stars. They seemed closer now, as if leaning over to see how the dream had unfolded. Sometimes he whispered to them, not in pride, but in gratitude. Then came the 8th year. The river's song changed. The wind carried a dry taste. Grain ripened too quickly. The earth cracked. The birds flew north in search of softer fields. Joseph knew before anyone said a word. The famine had begun. He opened the storehouses. The grain poured out like gold. Egypt ate and lived. And soon, word spread across borders. Men came from Canaan, from the deserts and the seacoast, seeking food. Among them, thin and dusty, walked a small band of brothers. But that belongs to the next chapter. For now, the dream that once rose from the lips of a sleeping king had turned to law written in bread and stone. And the boy who had dreamed of stars bowing stood at the height of power, not as a conqueror, but as the servant of the vision that had never left him. Above the city, the falcons wheeled in circles of light. Below, the river moved with the same calm certainty as fate itself. And in a quiet chamber, Joseph knelt, not to the gods of Egypt, but to the unseen hand that had led him through pit and prison to throne, through loss to purpose. The famine arrived without drama, the way a candle goes out when the room has already decided to be dark. Winds changed their grammar. The Nile withdrew its generosity. Fields spoke in the brittle language of husk and dust. Across borders and caravan paths, the same rumor traveled. There is bread in Egypt. From the north, a small procession moved. Men with lean faces and steps measured by caution and hope. Their clothes carried the map of distance. Canaan's clay at the hem, the scent of goat. A stitch here and there, mended beside a fire that no longer burned as warm as it once did. 10 brothers, carrying the ache of an absent 11th, as if it were another pack on their backs. They entered the city that sat like a necklace along the river. The market of grain rose before them, a wide plaza bordered by tall silos whose bellies remembered rain. Scribes sat at low tables with tablets and reeds, measuring mercy into numbers. Overseers called out allotments, oxen groaned, ropes sang over pulleys. And on a raised dais, beneath a canopy of linen the color of noon, stood the man appointed over it all. Egypt's steward, Pharaoh's right hand, the one whose word had become bread. Joseph. He had learned how to stand so that responsibility did not bow his shoulders. Feet grounded, a breath deep, gaze steady. The gold circlet on his brow belonged to Egypt, but the light in his eyes belonged to no country. He looked out over the line of supplicants, reading hunger the way a shepherd reads weather, by air, by posture. By the weight, a man can no longer hide. Then he saw them, 10 figures, familiar and ruined by time in the exact way memory had prophesied. Simeon's jaw set like a stone used too long for cracking bones. Levi's eyes sharp, wary. Issachar broader, slower. Zebulun carrying a fatigue that did not announce itself. Dan glancing sidewise for threat. Naphtali restless. Gad and Asher silent as men practicing obedience. Reuben older than his years. His mouth carrying a confession geology could not afford to carve. And Judah with a history of a decision in the way he held his shoulders, as if a weight he could not put down had at least taught him how to walk. Joseph's breath shortened, and then found itself again. He did not trust the first tide in his chest. Grief, rage, joy, longing. So he let it pass beneath him like a wave under a boat. When they reached the dais, they bowed low, their foreheads almost touching the dust where the feet of strangers had made a map of need. The dream came back with the clarity of a star reflected in still water. He spoke to them through an interpreter, his voice a river they were not allowed to drink except in measured cups. "Where do you come from?" "From the land of Canaan," they answered, not lifting their eyes, "to buy food." "You are spies," Joseph said, and the word landed like a thrown coin, hard and bright. They flinched. "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food." "We are all brothers, honest men." "Your servants are not spies, honest men." He let the irony rest where only he could see it. "Where is your father?" "Have you another brother?" The story came haltingly, told by men who suspected stories had begun to cost more than they once did. "We are 12 brothers, sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is with our father today. One is no more. No more." A phrase clean enough to eat with. Joseph kept his face still the way a priest keeps a flame from the wind. "I will test your words," he said. "By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go forth unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you to fetch him. The rest shall remain bound, that your words may be proved." They were taken aside then, seized not with the cruelty of spectacle, but with the efficiency of administration. Iron found wrists, fear found spines. They were led to the holding room, a chamber whose stone had learned the smell of men who would rather be anywhere else. Joseph turned away from the sight so that he could bear it. 3 days passed. In that small span, a man can learn what his soul believes. On the 3rd day, Joseph sent for them again. Their faces had the color of straw tea. He spoke more gently, but still through the interpreter, still from a height that refused familiarity. "Do this and live. For I fear God," he said. A sentence thrown like a rope across a canyon, whether they caught it or not. "If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined here. The rest of you carry grain to your households in famine. But bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." They looked at one another as men do when every face is a mirror. Reuben spoke first, and though he addressed them, the words were shaped for the ear of judgment itself. "Did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy? But you would not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." They did not know Joseph understood. The interpreter stood idle. The truth needed no translation. He turned aside and wept. The tears were not dramatic. They were the quiet overflow of a vessel that had learned to carry more than it was made to hold. When he mastered himself, he returned and chose Simeon to remain. Simeon met his gaze for the first time. And in that small contact, a history passed like a storm seen silently through glass. Simeon was bound before them. The others received their measures of grain. Joseph commanded that each man's silver be placed again in his sack and provisions be given for the journey. It was mercy hidden like a stone at the bottom of a river. Felt, not seen, heavy enough to alter the course. They left Egypt with bags that knocked against their knees and hearts that knocked against their ribs. On the road, when one opened his sack to feed a donkey, the mouth of the bag flashed with the pale grin of silver. "My money has been restored," he cried. And fear moved through the group like a shadow crossing a field. Each found the same surprise and felt the same dread. Generosity misread as trap. At home, Jacob listened to the tale as a man listens to thunder he cannot outrun. The grain lay at his feet. The story lay heavier on his chest. When they said, "The man spoke roughly to us," he winced as if the roughness had crossed the distance and struck his cheek. When they said, "Send Benjamin with us," he shook his head until refusal became a kind of prayer. "Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and you would take Benjamin," he said. "All these things are against me." Time, however, makes its own arguments. Bread diminished to crumb, the horizon paled with a hunger light older than language. Judah came near and knelt, a prince bending to a wound. "Send the boy with me," he said quietly. "I will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then I will bear the blame all my life." The words found the one hinge Jacob had not yet sealed. He looked at Benjamin, the child whose laugh had once repaired air, and nodded like a man signing a covenant with a trembling hand. Gifts were gathered. A little balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts, almonds. Poverty choosing its finest shirt. Double money was taken for the sacks that had smiled too brightly last time. And Benjamin, wrapped in care, went with his brothers. Back in Egypt, the steward received them and led them, startled, into Joseph's own house. Fear returned to their throats. "It is because of the money," they muttered. "He seeks occasion against us." But the steward, an Egyptian who had learned a Hebrew's gentleness, said only, "Peace to you, fear not. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks. I had your silver, he brought Simeon out." The brothers held him the way men hold a rescued word. Water was given. Their feet were washed. Fodder found the donkeys. At noon, they were brought before the steward of Egypt. Joseph entered. The room tilted for him for the briefest moment. Benjamin stood there, no longer a child, yet the same. The same gravity near the eyes. The same laughter stored like good wine behind a sealed door. Joseph asked about their welfare, and they bowed low, fulfilling the geometry of a dream. "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke?" he asked. "Is he yet alive?" "Your servant our father is well," they said. "He is still alive." Joseph turned to Benjamin. "God be gracious to you, my son." The word son slid out from a place he had kept locked so long that even he had forgotten how the latch worked. He hurried from the room and found a chamber where no one would see him, and wept there, the kind that empties and fills a man at once. He washed his face, returned, and commanded the meal. The tables were arranged in the manner Egypt preferred, one for Egyptians, one for Hebrews, one for the steward. The brothers found themselves seated in birth order, Reuben to Benjamin, an arrangement that set their hearts beating like small trapped animals. Dishes came, steaming and fragrant. Portions were sent from Joseph's table to theirs, and Benjamin's was 5 times as much, as if to make up in one afternoon for years of underfeeding by fate. Wine softened the room's edges. Laughter, tentative at first, then genuine, found them, as rain finds a dry gully and teaches it the old song. For a span of an hour, the world remembered its better shape. And then the test, which was not cruelty but craft, a measuring not of their stomachs but of their souls. At dawn, the brothers' sacks were filled, their silver returned. In Benjamin's sack, Joseph's silver cup, a moon of metal, was hidden at the mouth. They set off happy in the morning light that makes men believe good news might be permanent. They had not gone far when the steward overtook them with a cloud of dust and a question sharpened to a point. Why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the cup by which my Lord divines? You have done wickedly. Their denial blazed with the surety of innocence. Far be it. With whomsoever of your servants it be found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondmen. The steward, merciful even in accusation, softened the sentence. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and you shall be blameless. Bags were lowered, mouths opened. Grain looked up surprised. The search ran from eldest to youngest, like a wick burning toward its inevitable flame. In Benjamin's sack, the cup flashed, a small, merciless moon. Clothes tore. Dust rose. The road that had felt like a promise turned at once into a confession. They returned to the city with the silent thunder of men who have run out of words. Before Joseph, they fell again. Judah stepped forward, carrying the whole story of his life in his voice. What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? How can we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. Joseph held the line taut. Far be it from me to do so. The man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. But as for you, get you up in peace to your father. Then Judah came nearer, the movement of a man laying down his last weapon, which is himself. He spoke not quickly, not eloquently, but with the architecture of truth, of an old father whose soul was tied to the boys, of another brother who was dead, of the pledge he had given, of the certain death that would follow if Benjamin did not return. And then the sentence that made the room larger than Egypt. Now therefore I pray you, let your servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father, if the lad be not with me, lest I see the evil that shall find my father? There are words that are doors. Joseph felt this one open. He sent everyone out, stewards, scribes, guards, the courteous air itself. Only the brothers remained. The silence after retreating sandals felt like a sea pulling back before the great wave. Joseph stood, a man full to breaking, and broke. He wept aloud, not the quiet priestly weeping of before, but the kind that carries a house with it. Those in the next court heard, those beyond guessed. He said through tears, in the clear Hebrew of his first mornings, I am Joseph. Does my father yet live? They were struck dumb. Their mouths opened and made no sound. Fear and wonder battled to name their faces. Come near to me, I pray you, he said. They came, and the nearness restored the world to its true scale. He touched them, not as a ruler touches criminals, but as a brother touches the past to unmake it. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that you sold me hither. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years has the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve a remnant in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, he said it until they believed him. Because men need permission to forgive themselves when the evidence argues otherwise. He kissed them one by one. Benjamin collapsed into his arms, and Joseph into his. Words failed, tears spoke the old language. Orders flew then, borne on the wings of joy. Make ready. Return quickly to my father and say, Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not. You shall dwell in Goshen near me, you, your children, your flocks, and all you have. And there will I nourish you. Take wagons from Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Regard not your goods. The good of all the land is yours. He sent them away with carts and garments and silver and grain, abundance correcting memory. To Benjamin he gave gifts multiplied, not because love plays favorites, but because love remembers. As they left, he held Judah's gaze a heartbeat longer. Something old nodded to something new between them, and both were relieved. When the brothers reached Canaan, tents brightened at the sound of wheels. Jacob rose, staff in hand, face stormed by years. They spoke too quickly at first, stepping on each other's joy. Then the sentence landed, the simple one that contains impossible architecture. Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. Jacob's heart fainted, then found itself like a fire dimmed by wind, and then fed. He saw the wagons, the impossible proof of an impossible claim, and the spirit of Jacob revived into Israel again. It is enough, he said, touching the wood as if it were skin. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. And so the old man began to move south, toward a river that had watered the earth since before his fathers were named, toward the son who had become a country's mercy. The road stretched ahead, dust braided with blessing. In the night, the stars watched, not bowing now, not needing to, but shining with the exactness that had guided the dream from boyhood to throne to brotherhood remade. The famine still held the world, but at its center a table had been set, and around it a family was learning to eat truth without choking. Bread baked in sorrow, broken in forgiveness, multiplied in purpose. The caravan left Canaan beneath a sky the color of ash after fire. At its head rode an old man whose eyes carried both oceans and deserts, the long geography of grief. Behind him moved sons, wagons, herds, and the laughter of children born into famine, but journeying toward abundance. The road curved south, through dry plains where once a young dreamer had been led in chains. Now that same road welcomed his father. Jacob traveled in silence, the kind of silence that gathers words instead of avoiding them. Every mile peeled away another layer of disbelief until only wonder remained. Sometimes, when evening spread its copper across the sand, he would lift his face to the wind and murmur, "Joseph, my son." The words tasted like spring water in a mouth long parched by mourning. At Beersheba, where his father Isaac had once built an altar, Jacob stopped. He offered sacrifices to the God of his fathers. And that night, as he lay beside the embers of his fire, the darkness spoke. Not in thunder, but in the language that moves behind the eyelids of prophets. Jacob, Jacob, here am I. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for there I will make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee, and I will surely bring thee up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. He woke with tears already on his face. The fire had burned to a quiet red, and above it the stars, those same 11 and their sun and moon, seemed to breathe in gentle agreement. He rose and told his sons, "It is time." When the caravan crossed into Egypt, the land opened before them like a dream Joseph might once have had, but forgotten to tell. Fields shimmered under irrigation channels. Palms bent over the slow silver of the Nile. The air carried the scent of wet clay, honey, and smoke from temple offerings. Fishermen cast nets that flashed like wings in the sunlight. Oxen turned the soil with patient strength. And at the edge of that abundance stood Joseph, waiting. He had come in his chariot, horses plumed in gold, attendants behind him holding standards shaped like the falcon of Ra. But when he saw the dust on the horizon and the shape of an old man leaning on his staff, all ceremony fell away. He ran. Between them, the years dissolved. When they met, it was not the prince of Egypt who embraced a shepherd, nor the patriarch who blessed a governor. It was a father and a son who had carried each other through distance too large for words. "I am ready to die," Jacob whispered into Joseph's shoulder, "for I have seen your face, because you are still alive." And Joseph wept again, the kind of weeping that is not sorrow, but release. The body's way of making room for joy, too large to contain. Pharaoh himself welcomed them. The old man stood before the ruler of the mightiest land on earth, his beard white as linen, his staff a tree worn smooth by faith. Pharaoh asked, "How old are you?" Jacob smiled with the tired humor of the wise. "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130. Few and evil have been the days of my life, and they have not attained unto the days of the years of my fathers." Pharaoh bowed his head. The old man blessed him, hands raised, voice soft as wind through reeds. And Egypt, without knowing it, received a benediction older than its pyramids. Joseph settled his family in Goshen, the most fertile part of the land. There the tents of shepherds stood beside the canals of farmers. The Hebrew tongue mingled with Egyptian songs. The laughter of children replaced the famine's silence. And still, Joseph served, managing grain, opening storehouses, ensuring that none hungered within the borders of Egypt or beyond. People came from every land, bringing silver, then cattle, then labor, until all Egypt belonged to Pharaoh. But Joseph's name was spoken with love, for mercy is remembered even when ownership changes hands. Years passed. Jacob's eyes dimmed, but his spirit grew brighter. He called his sons to him, one by one, to speak the final words that would shape tribes and time. The tent smelled of oil and wool, of approaching eternity. To Reuben he said, "Unstable as water, you shall not excel." To Judah, whose voice had once offered himself for Benjamin, he said, "The scepter shall not depart from you, nor a lawgiver from between your feet, until Shiloh come." To Joseph he gave more than words. He laid his trembling hands on the heads of Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, crossing his arms so that the younger received the greater blessing. Joseph tried to correct him. "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn." But Jacob said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, but his younger brother shall be greater. And in you shall Israel bless, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. He drew his son near again, kissed his brow and whispered, Behold, I die. But God shall be with you, and bring you again unto the land of your fathers. And when he finished, he gathered his feet into the bed, and was gathered to his people. The wailing of Egypt rose like the tide. Joseph commanded that his father be embalmed, and the physicians worked for 40 days, anointing, wrapping, perfuming. All Egypt mourned 70 days. And when the time was done, Pharaoh granted permission for the long journey north. The procession was like a moving temple. Chariots, horsemen, elders of Egypt, servants of Pharaoh, Joseph's household, and his brothers, all bearing the weight of the promise. They crossed deserts and valleys until they reached the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac slept. There Joseph buried his father, the air trembling with prayer, dust, and gratitude. When they returned to Egypt, the brothers were afraid again. They remembered their old sin and said, Perhaps Joseph will hate us and requite us all the evil we did unto him. They sent messengers with humble words. Forgive, we pray you, the trespass of your brothers and their sin. Joseph wept when he heard it. Then he called them and said, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? You thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear not. I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them, speaking kindly, as a man who has walked through all the shapes of pain and learned their proper names. Years folded upon years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. He grew older, not weaker. The lines on his face deepened into grace. His eyes held both wisdom and the glimmer of remembered dreams. When he knew his time was near, he gathered his brothers and their sons. I die, he said, and God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land unto the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Carry up my bones from hence, they promised. And he smiled, the small, tired smile of a man who has seen his own life turn into prophecy fulfilled. He lay back. Through the open lattice, the Nile glimmered in the moonlight, winding endlessly like the mercy that had carried him from pit to throne. Outside, the palms whispered. Inside, peace settled like evening incense. His last breath was not a sigh, but a prayer, that those who live after him might remember the long road through suffering not as punishment, but as the path by which light finds its way home. And so Joseph slept. Above the roofs of Egypt, the stars burned without bowing, steady and eternal. But the light that once filled a dream now filled the world. And so the dreamer slept. The wells of sorrow had become rivers of grace, and every shadow he had walked through now glowed with the soft light of understanding. The stars above Egypt no longer bowed. They simply burned, steady and eternal, watching a soul that had found its home. Wherever you are tonight, may the road of your own dreams lead you toward peace, as Joseph's did. Through darkness, toward light. Tell me, dear listener, what story would you like to hear next time? Until then, rest, breathe, and dream gently beneath the quiet sky.